Nice to meet you all. My name is Tom Gabay. I'm an R&D group leader at Kaltura. You might recognize me from those 23 frames that was on Netflix, the successful show Hit and Run. This is me as a doctor, probably the longest day in my life. Yeah, so let's start. We're going to talk about today is BAT. Well, not just any BAT, but an open source library called Behavioral API Tester. This is an opportunity to thank my greatest mentor, Phil Mander, used to be my boss in my previous company, Harver, who is the heart and minds behind this library and basically wrote most of it. So before we talk about BAT, let's talk about the problem, what kind of problem we had. So as a Node developer, basically I'm writing APIs most of the time. And some of those APIs, we had a lot of internal APIs, let's say for our user, for our front end. And those APIs, they change all the time, right? Maybe our data modeling is changing behind the scenes. Maybe we change database, new features coming all the time. So it's a rapidly changing APIs. And those APIs in the real world, they couple to implementation sometimes, right? Not the best, but it happens. But we also had external clients. Those external clients, big enterprise clients, also wanted to use this API, and they wanted their own API specifically for them. So we ended up creating a lot of APIs just for our clients via some API server. So this API server uses the main server API and just creates their own API for our clients. And those APIs can change all the time, right? There's a typo in the can change all the time, and it can't be coupled to implementation. It needs to be really strict. So how do we solve that? I know only one way really to solve the problem that APIs changing all the time, but need to be consistent, is testing. And when I'm talking all about testing all the time. And when you're a young company, maybe you have a few dozen API, you might use something like Postman. I assume everybody here knows Postman. Postman also have an assertion library, right? You can assert with Postman, putting all your API, run it before you deploy, and it will assert and test your APIs. But it's not really scalable, right? As soon as you have hundreds of APIs, it's not really scalable. It's also not natural for a developer to write his code outside his IDE, outside his code, and then bring it back. It's not natural. We wanted to use those testing inside our CI. Postman have a way to do that, but we wanted a solution that works for us. And that solution was this: BDD plus Gherkin plus Cucumber.js. And yeah, this is a Cucumber.js. So I assume a lot of you didn't heard about BDD, and if you heard about it, you didn't use it. Why? Because it's mostly, like 99% of the time, using end-to-end testing. And I'll explain what BDD is first. So let's go over the example. It's an end-to-end example. I have a feature. This feature is called a TLV site, and I have a scenario moving between tabs, right? So I'm writing the test now. Given I'm an anonymous, I don't need to log in. When I navigate to tlv.com and I press the agenda button, then I should see the agenda header and I should see the agenda list. What's going on here? It's not a test. So basically, BDD, it's a way for everyone to write tests in simple English. When I say everyone, is also product and business owner and stuff like that, not just developer. Anyone can write test in your scenario in simple English, and those simple English becomes a test. This simple English has a framework. It's called Gherkin, but it's a simple English, you can see. So how is it become a test behind the scenes? So that's where Cucumber come to our aid. Cucumber help us to bind between words, simple English, and our code. And this is called a step definition. So you have a function called a when function for this example. When I navigate to URL, then it goes to this URL. And the second function, when I press a button in button, then it searches for this button and click it. So what happens here? We have our simple English, right? And this simple English behind the scenes becomes a test. And we can see how we can assert stuff, right? Then I should see the agenda header. I will have a function that's called a then function. It will search for a header with the agenda text in it. So this is BDD in general, and 99% of the users that use BDD do it like this. What we did, what we wanted to do. So this is a basic BAT example. We're going to use, there's a service called Hacker News. Basically, everyone can use the API to get a list of the latest news. Let's see what we're going to do here. Our feature is Hacker News. A scenario is get top story. Given, I'm anonymous. Again, given is the base condition for our test. When I sent a GET request to top story, and again, when is the actual test, then I should receive a response with a status 200. Basically, that's the test. So I'm going to show what we did behind the scene. I'm going to the source code of the library. We implemented the entire code, basically, that you will need to use API with BDD. One thing I didn't say about BDD, it's amazing, but you need to work very hard at the start to create all this code for it to be actually useful. But if you think about it, in API, HTTP testing, HTTP is a closed format. You can do so many things. You can add a body, you can add a header, you can get a status code, right? There's pretty much finite things you can do with HTTP calls. And we said, hey, let's create all the code you will ever need to do BDD with API testing. And this is what we did. So let's look at the example. Let's look at the example up here. Then I should receive a response with the status int. And that goes to a function that basically just does expect res status to equal status. Right? This is simple. Now we can assert on every status code ever. And this is, of course, one example. So this is how it works. This is BDD. If you need to understand anything from BAT, this is what it is. You can write your API testing with simple words, and we already implemented everything behind the scene. You just need to write the simple words, product, whatever. How do you install it? You just npm install it, pretty simple. You need to wire things up with Cucumber.js, but again, pretty simple. Let's look at one more example, Twitter API, the previous Twitter API. Our given step. Again, given, it's the base condition for our test. So the background, given, I set a variable with the base host. Our scenario, search for tweets containing NodeTLV. Given, again, I'm putting a base condition. I'm using a basic authentication with credential. I'm putting my credential, and I obtain an access token, obtain the access token. This is it. When, and again, when, this is actually what I want to test, right? So when I send a GET request to this URL, and I add a query string parameter, NodeTLV. Then is the assertion. I should receive a status code receive a response with status 200, and I should receive a response within 500 milliseconds, and I should have some body property on it. And this is basically it. This will work. This will go. You just need to write those words. This will go to Twitter, test your API, and assert it. Basically, it's allow everybody to be participant in the testing. Products comes when a new API, can just write that, and boom, you already have a test. Now as a developer, you just need to make it pass. One thing you might notice is a bit tedious to say, I am using basic authentication with credential. It's a lot of words. So we also created like a short version, basic auth with, and get function and receive status 200, just to make it easier. One thing about this library, because you are using Word, the documentation needs to be amazing, and the documentation is amazing, thanks to Phil. Really top-level documentation for this library. And you also get, out of the box, a lot of reports. Because it's Cucumber.js, it's come with all the reports you will ever need.